Hello and welcome back to Bedside Murmurs, a podcast where we chat with doctors about their careers, pathways in medicine, clinical tips, and much more. If you have any questions or have any ideas for guests you would like to see on the show, please send us an email at podcast@medsoc.org.au or direct message us on Instagram at Bedside Murmurs. I'm Sean.
And I'm Emily, and we will be your hosts for today. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Sonia Henry, who is a general practitioner and best-selling author of 2 books. She is passionate about remote medicine and First Nations health, and she's committed to using her platform to advocate for equitable, accessible healthcare for all Australians. Welcome, Dr. Henry.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.
You've had a very exciting medical career, but you actually had a career before this. So could you tell us about your journey into medical school?
Yeah, so I started originally as a physio, and I wasn't one of those people that did physio to do medicine. I was really into sport, and I wanted to work, do team sport, go on the Tour de France. You know, every physio has these dreams. I actually did do some team sport at the end, but after a few years of physio, I got a bit bored with it, and not that physio is a boring job. I just sort of wanted to do something different, and Actually, it's kind of a funny story that I have told before. So anyway, I sat the GAMSAT and, I did all right, and I ended up getting an offer to do medicine, and I started medicine, and then I deferred for a year because I just wasn't really sure if it was for me. And I actually got a job lined up as a physio working for an offshoot of the London Ballet Company. And it was really good money back then, and, it seemed like a cool gig traveling around Europe. And just before I left, unfortunately, I broke my arm skiing. So I couldn't do the job, right?
Yeah.
And then the uni so I had no money, and I was sort of over in Europe, and the uni was kind of like, are you going to come back or not? And I was at the point where I was sort of like, well, and I ended up, my arm had gotten better, and I went to Zermatt to ski the glacier, which is in Switzerland in the spring, and I met a doctor who had taken her van from Spain to Switzerland and was doing a mountain rescue course. Her name was Sarah, and she told me all about what it was like. And I mean, she was Spanish, so a bit different.
Google Translate.
Yeah. Well, I helped her with a PowerPoint presentation, with the English translations. Oh. And she said, "Look, it's the best job. Medicine is the best job, and you can make it whatever you want it to be." And then I remember thinking, well, I've run out of money. My arm's better. I've met this kind of woman in this who's told me it was really meant to be, and I came back to medicine. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think a lot of us in medical school kind of have this impression that medicine is like this very straight pathway. Like for us in UNSW, it's like you get in straight through straight through high school, and then you're like, I finish medical school and then I do my research so I can get into a advanced course or do BBT or the GSSE, and then it's like back until eventually I become a consultant, and then my life ends there.
Yeah.
Clearly that's like super different from what you've experienced in medicine.
Well, I think it's very insightful that you guys have the podcast and you're having these conversations. I mean, maybe 10 years ago, medical students may not have been having these conversations, but I must say I had a lunch on the weekend actually with some journalist friends, and I said, I love the young people these days. Are you guys Gen Z? Are you Gen Z?
Oh, this is really telling. I'm not sure.
Neither am I.
Whatever that your generation seems to be having more conversations about quality of life, mental health, much more freely than what I think we did, which I think is really cool. Yeah.
I think it's probably because we kind of grew up in like an internet age where we share a lot. I think very similar to in tech jobs, they had a similar idea where sometimes you before very few people discuss their salaries, and now there's open source platforms where people just share how much they're making from certain jobs. It means that the work environment is a lot more democratic. The workers are.
Okay, good point. Yeah. I didn't think you're right. All of that is a good thing about social media and that kind of thing. It allows open discussion, which therefore opens a lot of doors and shines lights on dark areas that people have previously kind of tried to pretend weren't there.
I mean, circling back to your experiences in medical school, what was it like when you were a medical student?
I mean, speaking very frankly, look, medical school is hard. I found it hard. I went to Notre Dame and we had the barrier exams, which I don't know if you guys have the same thing.
We do.
I think I actually had that discussion with a UNSW student when I was an intern. I found that structure quite stressful. And as we were talking on the way walking in here, it's not very flexible. So you sort of if you want to take a bit of time out, you can't really do that. I mean, even deferring was a really, almost impossible for me to do, but it worked out for me. But and I also found in medical school, I think I started to notice the pervasive culture of bullying in medicine, and just the almost unspoken, well, it was pretty unspoken, that you just sort of had to shut up and get on with it. And you sort of feel it, that constant pressure, I think, starts in medical school, and then it continues, unfortunately. Yeah. I had some good experiences.
Did you find that those attitudes that you experienced continued when you were a junior doctor and when you started working?
Most definitely, yeah. And I found as well, medical school, despite it was a great course I did, the uni was good and everything, but nothing really prepares you for being a junior doctor until you're actually there. It doesn't really matter how true to life your rotations are and that kind of thing. It's just a different experience, I think. Look, it was, being a junior doctor is also hard. Look, there's some great moments, you make great friends, and there are positive aspects, but I think we're doing a disservice to the profession and to people who are struggling in the profession to say that it isn't. It's a very challenging job and time. Yeah.
What if you don't mind me asking, what specific things do you think need to change with how junior doctor kind of rotations are being run for it to be a little bit more empathetic towards the experiences of newly graduated junior doctors?
Look, it's more, and I've said this before, like in terms of rotations and stuff, I mean, look, you don't really have much control over that. It would be nice if there was a bit more like empathy and understanding. I do think that medical administrators generally are very removed from the actual position of, what it's like being a junior doctor. Just as an anecdote, I remember we were out for drinks one night after work or something, and with the the admin people were there, and through no fault of their own, I guess, I think me and my housemate at the time were talking about certifying a death on the ward, and with the process of that, and which it happens all of a sudden, and it's a bit confronting. And she was like, "Oh my God, like you guys have to do that?" Sort of, wow, what? And she thought that was just so horrific. And I remember thinking, well, you're the administrator who's controlling our rosters, who is angry or upset if we can't work a certain shift, and you don't even know what goes on up there. Like that really showed me the disconnect between the people who, So I think the administration side of medicine needs to have a better approach in how they treat rostering and junior doctors. And essentially there needs to be a cultural shift, where that, like I said, that sort of pervasive teaching by bullying and that kind of thing kind of needs to stop. And I don't think it really has stopped, unfortunately.
I very much get the impression that at least sometimes when you're a junior doctor, when your senior doctors want you to perform an act, it's more so like an expectation that, oh, you should know this, and the pressure of like not knowing it is the instigation for you learning, as opposed to like genuine curiosity or interest.
I think that's extremely insightful. And I remember being a junior doctor once, I think it was an emergency, and I remember a patient was very sick, and they were sort of peri-mortem, I guess.
Very well described.
Yeah, I was like, I can't believe I come up with that. But I think that I was more frightened of what my colleagues and superiors would say about the situation rather than my concern for the patient. And I remember thinking, wow, I actually wrote an article when I was a medical student about this called "When Doctors Lose Their Empathy," because I had very little empathy at the time for the patient, because I was so frightened of. So you're like you say, you're driven more by
not
fear.
being seen to do something wrong,
rather than genuine. Even if you were a caring person to begin with, and I think that's very sad. Yeah.
When you were a junior doctor, that was when you wrote your first book, Going Under. Could you tell us about the writing process and if your experiences as a junior doctor influenced how you wrote the book?
Yeah. I mean, originally I wanted to write it as a memoir, but the publishing house was too worried I'd get sued, or they'd get sued. We'd both get sued. So I turned
everybody loses.
Yeah. So I turned it into a fictional book. So a lot of it is influenced by my experience or stories of doctors or people. I wrote it I started writing it when I was a resident, and I published it when I was a registrar. So I was out of the hospital system by then, which was probably helpful. But considering I don't think I could have published a book like that and still been in the system, because it was a bit controversial and subversive, I suppose. Telling the truth can be a subversive act. I mean, yes, I think everything that was in my book has happened to either me, a friend of mine, or a junior doctor at some point in the history of medical training. Yeah.
But fictionalized to protect.
Yes.
Yeah. And what was the response like from people who read your book, both in the medical community and broader?
Overall, it was very positive, but that was sort of because I'd captured the zeitgeist, I suppose, of this idea that doctors were not all powerful, that we were human, that we had feelings, that we were under a huge amount of pressure. And I'd published an anonymous article called "There is Something Rotten Inside the Medical Profession" 2 years before that went viral on an American blog called Kevin MD, and it was shared like, I think, close to 100,000 times in the end, which I never came out that I had been the person who wrote it, which was for one, I was scared of the hospital, but secondly, I knew that as soon as my name was attached to it, people would then try and make it about me rather than make it about when you speak as no one, you can kind of speak for everyone. So that article set off a whole chain of discussions about suicide of doctors in Australia and around the world, and then my book kind of was published off the back of that.
Yeah, I've heard there are a lot of hidden suicides within medicine.
There was one quite recently, I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I saw someone post something about it and I thought, wow.
Yeah, it's really sad to see so many people in the profession under this stress and that culture of bullying still permeating. The way that junior doctors and even senior doctors interact with each other. But it's really good to hear about people like you who are committed to making a change and using your voice to write about things which matter and actually instigating change. So us as the future of medicine can actually be looking forward to a more positive future and a more positive culture.
And you guys are the future. You're the change makers, as in... And I have noticed that I always say this, I love talking to medical students. You don't seem to put up with as much BS as what I did, what my generation did. I don't know whether that's just my impression but you seem braver. And hopefully my articles and my books have somehow contributed to that, which is a good thing, yeah.
The hope is essentially by sharing as many stories as possible, also with more social media, more eyes on the problem, there can be more like minds thinking of the solution, but also it means that if you feel like you're kind of trapped inside a system that you can't do anything about, you at least don't feel like you're alone, whereas before when there wasn't quite as much transparency about what happens within a hospital, and also especially the general public isn't quite as aware about what happens within the hospital behind as soon as the curtain closes, you can't see what happens behind like all the bureaucratic nonsense of the treatments and also the doctors going in and out of your room. You don't see that aspect of medicine.
No, and the general public labours under the false delusion, that all doctors are very wealthy and all doctors are all, we're all these arrogant sort of, and that's been, for junior doctors, so far from their experience.
Yeah. How did you start then to think about becoming a general practitioner as a junior doctor? Do you think your experiences in the hospital system influenced your decision to work in the community?
I always was going to do GP really because I wanted to write books. Like I wanted to write books probably more than I wanted to be a doctor, being very honest. And I thought if I give up on this idea of writing books and try and become a specialist, and specialists do also write books, but for me, I wanted to do it then. I wanted to do it now. I didn't want to wait 20 years. I didn't want to be pushing I like too many things about my life more than the job. And I was honest with myself about that. I mean, even I felt the pressure in the hospital. Sometimes, as I said to a friend, it's much harder to do the things you want to do rather than the things that you don't, because the things that we don't particularly want to do, it's easy to get on the train, right? You get on the train that says medical school and you just never get off, and the next stop specialist training and the next stop is a PhD and the next stop is a hospital appointment and then it's a private rooms and, then it's the private schools for your kids, and then and then one day you wake up and you're dead, or you don't wake up.
Oh gosh!
Because when you're dead, you wouldn't wake up, would you? The point is, I am a doctor, believe it or not. But the point is that I had a real fear of that, and I saw what was happening to some trainees in the hospital. I saw how it consumed them. The job really consumed them, and I remember thinking, I'm not going to do that. And so I did GP,
And did you find that doing training to become a GP was a lot more flexible than the training for specialists, or was it the same level of rigor?
Like, it was pretty annoying, to be honest. I mean, like, it was, GP training's a pain, but it's a lot shorter.
Okay.
And I was given the flexibility to take 6 months off, and I went around Europe with some friends, and that was really fun. I worked as an ED registrar for a bit. I did locums at the private hospital, so that was pretty cool. But I don't know if that's that flexible now. But and actually, no, my last term I did part-time. So I suppose GP is definitely more flexible, and it's shorter, which is you sort of realise this once you're out of medical school and in the system. Getting a fellowship in medicine is kind of, it allows you to do a lot more. It allows you to make more money. It allows you to have a job title rather than sort of being lost in the system. And GP fellowship it allowed me to expand my life in ways that I wouldn't have been able to without that. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And did you ever see yourself working rurally as a GP?
No, definitely not. Which is so funny that then I ended up literally in the middle of nowhere, and then I wrote a book about it.
So how did that happen?
I was this person who'd written all about, mental health in doctors and suicide and that kind of thing. And then I suppose I hadn't been immune to it, but I hadn't ever been that low, I guess. And then I had a series of really unfortunate things happen, and I was kind of like, wow, I need to get out of Sydney. I'm finding myself in this very bad mental space, and it all looked so great on the outside, right? But inside I was like, I really had hit the wall. I don't like the term burnout particularly, but I guess I was the old-fashioned term burnt out. And I actually got a job lined up in Dublin in Ireland as a GP.
Wow.
As a GP, you can work, you're recognised in Ireland and Canada and the UK once you get an Australian fellowship, which is really cool. And then COVID happened and they shut the international borders. So I signed up with a remote locum agency, and I said I want to go as far away as possible. And they said there's a job in the middle of the Pilbara region of Western Australia, solo GP.
Wow.
You can start right away. And I was like, great. So I literally went from Sydney to the middle of the Pilbara. Then I spent nearly 3 years working in very remote parts of Australia. Yeah.
What about that experience is different to the experience that you would normally have if you were a GP in like a more metropolitan area?
I mean, it's completely different. It's like being on another planet, which is amazing when you're in the same country, like you're under the same federal umbrella, right? I mean, I've worked in Sydney, and you can send people, I had a guy when I was working in Surrey Hills whose eye was a bit bloodshot and blurry, and turned out he had a retinal detachment. Sydney Eye Hospital, he just got the train down there, no problem. Whereas in where I was, I mean, I had a woman with a similar thing, but luckily the Lions Vision bus happened to be in Karratha, the town that was 400 kilometres away.
That's really lucky.
Amazing, but as in that's not common. I mean, that was just by chance. Like, people will die out there and they don't have to. Like it's just everything is you're relying on the flying doctors to come and help you if there's a problem. Like you can't imagine the nearest hospital with big hospitals 2,500 kilometers away.
Wow.
I mean, yeah.
And I would imagine, like, I think a lot of the things that we take for granted in a like metropolitan hospital, like just none of that resources is out rurally.
No. I mean, even things like radiology and stuff can be very hard to get. Or when I worked in Broome, the nearest MRI was in Perth. That's nearly 3,000 k's away.
It's amazing how far Australia is from itself.
Well, that's what I realised when I was actually there, Sean. I was sort of like this. I had no idea how big the country was, which is so crazy, right? Like we all know, and we all do like the Indigenous health module, and we do the remote medicine module. But until you're there,
you actually see it.
It changed everything. It certainly changed my view of my country very much so, and myself, I guess, as a doctor and a person, which is good. I think it's good personal growth. But yeah, it's wild how different it is.
Did you find that it really pushed your clinical skills, having to work by yourself as a general practitioner with no hospitals, specialists in easy contact nearby?
It did. And look, I'm a very much called a specialist kind of person, as in, or GP, I guess. Like I have never been an arrogant doctor. If I can get help, I will ask for it, you know, because when you're that remote, I mean, the patients deserve the best care. If you know, and they're pretty nice, particularly in WA, in Perth, because they understand how big their state is. So as soon as you say I'm in the Pilbara, I'm in the Kimberley, I've never dealt with such nice registrars as in Perth. I think they were nicer there than over east, as they say, in the west. But they were lovely. But yeah, I was always on the phone to the hospital and on the phone to the RFDS and speaking to colleagues if I was in a place where I had colleagues, and certainly it sharpens your intuition as well. And you also have to come to some kind of understanding with yourself that if things really go south, the patient could die. And that's when I truly realized how risky and how remote and I've worked in some places that were more remote than others, but my very first job happened to be the most remote, which I was like,
right in the deep end.
Yeah, I mean, it looks different to the tourist brochures, but it does make you, I think. And then working in Sydney after being out there, it just felt so easy. Yeah, because everything was right at your fingertips. You know, when I came back and worked for a bit in the city, I was like, oh, wow, this is so easy. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people who are kind of like a little bit on the fence about going towards rurally. One of the big concerns that they have is they're going to be out there with the knowledge that they have, and it's going to be very isolating. It's going to be super... like they won't be able to ask for help or anything. They'll be kind of helpless. They'll be away from their family. Do you have any advice for someone who might be considering going rurally but are finding like there's lots of challenges mentally about taking that step?
Yeah, and those are very reasonable concerns. And I think my answer to that is remote Australia and rural Australia and rural medicine, there's lots of shades of it. So there are certain places you can go where there's actually a hospital and there's lots of different like Kununurra, for example, where I've spent a lot of time in the Kimberley, has a hospital, has lots of doctors there, very supportive, very collegial, beautiful place, so very enjoyable. And you know, places like Broome and in southern WA and parts of Queensland, like you will find actually very collegial, remote and good support, whereas you just need to figure out where you go. And I think those are very good questions to ask, because you should ask them and then you can make a decision based around that.
And what were some of the highlights of your time rurally? You mentioned that it had really shaped your perspective of Australia and of healthcare. So, yeah.
I mean, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So suddenly you're in this beautiful place, right? Like you're meeting you know, Aboriginal people who I'd never really had close friendships with before, and suddenly I did, and they taught me lots about their culture and the history and you know, but then obviously then you realise the terrible tragedy and the suffering and so you're in these beautiful places, right? Like you're in the Kimberley, you're swimming in Lake Argyle, you're seeing, you know, thousands and thousands of years old rock art on rocks that in Europe would ever be in a museum, whereas you just walk past it. But then you realise, like, you know, you're also seeing a 24-year-old in fulminant, you know, ketoacidosis, and you're seeing 19-year-olds in heart failure because of rheumatic heart disease, and you're seeing us all people with leprosy in the Northern Territory. And so you it's sort of like this great joy of seeing these amazing places and meeting these really amazing people, and then realising the terrible suffering that it's really third world suffering that shouldn't be like that in a country like Australia.
Oh wow, that really puts into perspective like the disparity between
huge. You don't know though until you know, like and I didn't know until I was there, and it was really shocking for me to see that, particularly in some parts of the Northern Territory. It was atrocious, you know, the conditions the people were living in and their healthcare, and you know, it really, I was disgusted actually with my country and myself for not knowing, and made me very angry. Still does actually, thinking about it. But on the flip side, like I said, now I know, whereas then I didn't.
And do you think that those experiences have now shaped how you think about your role as a GP in Australia and what you can do with your profession? Oh,
definitely. I mean, you know, I was only just watching the news the other day, and I said to my boyfriend, I said, I really should go and do work in, you know, another country or a war zone or something. I mean, I've just had a baby, so probably not at the moment.
Maybe not war zone immediately after having a child.
My mum's like, don't follow the bus that said doctors needed. You kind of feel this. But I think it's, as a doctor, you have a duty to do good in the world if you can. And I have read or I've I read an interview. The doctor said, it is an act of defiance in this world where so many bad things happen for us to do some good. So even if you can do so little, you feel so helpless, but you are helping one individual patient with something, that's still better than what most of the world is doing. And we have that duty, I think, as doctors to actually, like I do for all of my discussion about medicine, the difficulties in the trials, I do believe the doctors are meant to help people. And I think a lot of doctors lose that. They lose their kindness, they lose, or maybe their motivations aren't great, or the job gets them down, the stress. But deep down, I think as a healer, this old-fashioned idea of the Hippocratic Oath, and like I do take that seriously, I realised. And it wasn't something I woke up and I was like, I'm just going to read the Hippocratic Oath.
Yeah.
But it's something over time and working in the bush and the desert and stuff, I have realised that it has become part of who I am. Yeah, this idea of trying to heal people, I think. And you have to hold on to that, right? Because you become very disillusioned otherwise.
I think there's a lot of intra-occupational competition within medicine.
There is, yeah.
One of the big things, especially within the hospital system, if you want to become a specialist, there's only so many spaces, and it gets published every year, the people that make it.
Yep.
It's such a small number, and many people spend years and years and years and years getting there. And I do think a part of it is also that going into medicine, you can have an idea of like where medicine should end, or like when like you're fully like qualified.
Yeah.
And there's an impression that if you go halfway, or if you go become a GP, you kind of stepped out of like the full training pathway, and you kind of like essentially went out halfway, or you didn't fully qualify, or something like that. You kind of stepped out in the middle of like the train.
Yeah.
It seems like you're trying to fight against the notion that you need to go the entire way through.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and look, I've always been quite pragmatic about being a GP. Look, you talk to some GPs and they get really, I'm a specialist. I mean, look, yes, being a GP is a specialty, like family physicians or whatever they call us in the States and that kind of thing. But it is different to becoming a specialist. The training is shorter. It's not as, no, it is rigorous. It is as rigorous. I shouldn't say that, but it's just different, and it's a different, it's very flexible. Like you can't just pick up and go and be a neurosurgeon if you want in the desert for 3 months and get paid for the pleasure, There are, like I don't have a chip on my shoulder about being a GP, right? It suits my lifestyle. It's led me into some incredible places. And I think that this idea of general practice is getting off the train halfway. Once you're a GP and you kind of, well, I found that, I was working in Kununurra and then I was in Ireland and I worked in Ireland and the pay is very good. It's very flexible. I sort of forgot about all of that. You start really living your life and you forget. The shackles of medicine are proverbial. They aren't real. They're just something that we're told about and the intra-occupational competition. I mean, that's driven by other people, right? Like if someone wants to say, oh, you're a GP, it's like, well, I mean, are you happy with your life? Like in the end, we need to actually, you're young, you're intelligent, you have a great, you're going to get a great degree, you're going to have a great life. Like make sure your life is great. You're so lucky to be in this position rather than like be miserable and stressed all the time,
I think that's something that a lot of medical students need to hear, that actually it's a really good choice to pursue general practice, and actually it offers you that flexibility to do so many things and have so many opportunities and actually just enjoy your life.
Oh, it's incredible. There's not many jobs like it, actually. Look at, and it's, if you want to go rurally part of the year, the things you're going to experience, like a friend of mine is in Perth doing an intensive care term. She's a GP rural trainee. She's going to be a GP anaesthetist. She's going to have a great life. I mean, it's not all about money, but everyone in the end kind of wants to know about money because you spend years and years doing this. She's going to make a ton of money. And like she's going to have a great time, like, and she's also going to help a lot of people in areas that people don't really care about. So I think, the GP shaming thing that goes on in hospitals is
not helpful at all.
And it's just silly. And it also, it holds people back from potentially exploring their best GP selves, Yeah.
I also think it's super fascinating that a lot of the general, I think that a lot of the narrative that the colleges and general practice like to push is kind of like trying to stray as far away from that idea as possible, even though I think a lot of people will be quite convinced by saying that while general practice doesn't have maybe as much of like the end pay as like a full-time consultant at a hospital would, like I think it would be very difficult to compare the salaries of a general practitioner versus a neurosurgeon, but they have dramatically different work lives.
Well, and it's about cost in terms of like, what is wealth to you?
Yeah.
You know, like if you want to look as a GP, like my GP once said to me, if you want to go and work full time and buy a house in a good part of Sydney, you can do it. If you want to work part time and live somewhere a bit cheaper, you can do it. If you want to work really hard for a few years and make as much X, Y, Z, and we're talking figures that for the rest of the population is still huge. I mean,
very reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you're thinking like, something like neurosurgery, because you sort of think, oh, well, I kind of want to get some bang for my buck after all these years. That's a very long, hard road with a large cost to your lifestyle. Mind you, if you just love to cut, then great. But if you do have other considerations, then it becomes a cost-benefit analysis, doesn't it?
I guess the risk associated with your job as well, because if you're doing something like surgery where the risks are higher,
exactly,
you're not just keeping those concerns at work; they filter on into every other aspect of your life.
It becomes
your life.
It becomes you, and I didn't want to do that. Yeah,
it's also like you want to try to separate as much as possible, like what you do at work from what you might experience at home. I was talking to one of my friends and she was just frankly shocked at like, oh, you guys just experience death willy-nilly on the wards all the time. Like she was just asking me like, oh, is like, are you okay? And I was like, oh yeah, no, I just witnessed like 4 or 5 deaths during my time in palliative care. And she was essentially like, that is not something that normal people should have to deal with on an everyday basis.
It is very interesting talking to non-medical people. I remember saying to a friend of mine who worked in a government sort of economics kind of job, I said, oh, there'd been, I think, 3 or 4 suicides that year of junior doctors. She's like, if that happened in my job, there'd be like a massive inquiry, like we'd be having counselling. And I was like, no, we got like a 3-sentence email and like, go back to work.
Please take care.
Yeah, so other normal non-doctors are like, whoa. Like when you actually, put that in that kind of perspective. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
All of those experiences that you've had as a doctor, you wrote in your latest book, Put Your Feet in the Dirt, Girl. What inspired you to write this memoir and to put it out into the world?
Well, I had no intention of working rurally or writing a memoir about it, which goes to show, just don't know where you're going to end up. But it was because of the experiences that I was having. I've always written as used writing as a way to understand my environment. It's almost like therapy, I guess. Like I said, Newton saw that says energy. Is it Newton? Energy can't be
Created or destroyed.
It can only be transferred into one form or another. And you got some medical students, you should know
Physics.
And so I thought that was how I felt about what I was seeing at work and the things I was experiencing. For me, you couldn't just forget it or it didn't disappear. I sort of converted it into words. That's how I saw it. And I thought they were great stories. I thought, and also I Googled how to write a memoir, which is kind of funny. You think when you're a published author, you wouldn't have to do that. And it said that that memoir should be something that you've done or you've experienced, but it's not really about you. It's about things that are bigger than you.
Wow, that's profound.
Yeah, and I really wanted that to come off in the book, which was this exercise in total humility, and that's how I felt out there. It wasn't about me. Like it wasn't about my story. It was about the stories of other people that in turn made me like really, I think, a better person. And that was meant to be the message of the book. And that's why I wanted to write it.
And how do you actually have time to write? When did you write?
Yeah, question. But look, if you really want to do something, you're going to do it. And I really wanted to do it, and like I said, I think it was good for me mentally to do that. And I just, after work, I'd just be like, right, tonight I'm going to write 2,000 words. And
damn.
Wow.
And I remember being in Broome and my friend wanted to go to the pub and I was like, no, I got to keep writing my book, man. And everyone was like, when's this book going to come out? I'm like, oh, I'll get there. And and then I had 2 weeks off and I wrote a lot of it in those 2 weeks. I mean, I'm a bit of a binge writer, though. It depends on your style. But when you want to write something, people often email me and stuff, how do you write? How do I get a publishing contract? But my answer is always, if you want to write a book, you have to sit down and write it. And the only people who get published are people that keep writing. And anyone can do it,
Yeah, I've often, like, a lot of, like, artistic people that I talk to who do lives either outside of medicine or have very busy lives and also an artistic pursuit kind of describe it as it's a impulse that like kind of is trying to break free from inside you. So like when you're trying to like do anything else that's not like the creative pursuit, it's just like trying to claw its way out. And when you actually go and like write, it's like as if it's flowing through you.
That's exactly how I felt. And I remember when I was an intern, I was trained at St Vincent's, and I used to walk in at 10 p.m. for a night shift in the emergency department. My house would be like, see you, mate. And I'm like, yeah, bye. And I'd look up at those lights. I still remember it saying St Vincent's Hospital, and I remember I would picture my book launch. Like I wasn't walking in thinking I'm going to be a specialist. I was walking in thinking,
wait till I write about this.
It's actually quite funny. A few of my consultants got in touch when the book came out. Oh, you've actually done it. And I was like, no, chapter 4. But no, I'm kidding. Not really. But yeah, so yeah, that's exactly how it is. You're right because you have to. Yeah.
Now that you've written 2 books and you've worked all over Australia and all over the world, what's next for you?
Like I said, I just had a baby, so that's kept me distracted. The master, as we call him. I'm actually working on a 3rd book, which is a medical crime fiction, but I've only written like 10,000 words. So I've kind of got but I've got it in my head. No.
We'll keep you accountable as the podcast.
Yeah,
you've said it now.
That's what I've said.
Exactly.
I've said it out loud. And my publisher actually did email me asking what you're working on something. And I was like, but I was on my computer, which had died, and I hadn't backed it up. So here's the great tech writer. But I went to the Apple store and they pulled it up and whatever.
Amazing.
But yeah, so I am still writing. I've just got to make the time.
Yeah, we'll get you back as soon as you finish.
Well, hopefully this will be my really big seller, and then I can maybe really cut back on the work. But we'll see.
Yeah, that's exciting. Do you have any advice for medical students who want to work in a more creative career in medicine or really want to pursue a more flexible lifestyle in medicine but just don't know how?
I think nowadays there's a lot more resources for you guys. Like Creative Careers in Medicine, the Facebook page is huge now, and I was part of that in the early days. Amandeep, the head of it, she's lovely. There's a lot of stuff in the medtech space, like we were talking about medtech space. I sound very techie, as a consultant. But yeah, and there are so many different ways to do it. I've always said to medical students, you're clinically very capable. You're going to a very good university. You're obviously highly intelligent. You don't need to worry about that stuff so much. It's more this idea of what is it you want out of your life. And medicine needs to work with your life. I know people say it's a calling and it's not a job, it's a vocation. And you know what? It's a job. Like,
so many words.
Ground yourself, it's a job.
It's a job. Like I said, there is great, beautiful aspects to it, healing and helping people and the clinical challenge and stuff. It's a job. Yeah. Like you're a human being. It's a big world and there's a massive amount of things young people like you can do with your lives. Like do not be determined by just the title. And I will just say I'm part of a council called the Medical Benevolent Association in New South Wales. We're a not-for-profit charity who deals with doctors and medical students in distress. So if anyone listening to this is a medical student who is struggling, if you Google MBA New South Wales, we have 24-hour social workers. It's a totally free and confidential service. And I've noticed actually we've had a lot of calls recently. So if anyone needs any help, please reach out to us.
And we'll put the link in the description below as well on Spotify and on YouTube, so you can find that as well.
And probably on Instagram.
Oh, great. Excellent.
We'll try our best.
Well, we're trying to be more, what's the word? Accessible to people. Yeah.
No, that's really fantastic to hear that you've taken initiative to get that going. So, yeah, as we've chatted about before, that's a really important thing, especially for us as students and soon to be junior doctors.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a great organisation. It's been around for years, and like I said, it's very helpful.
Thank you so much for chatting with us today, Dr. Henry. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you about being an author, being a doctor, a general practitioner, and all of your amazing experiences. And I'm sure that all of our listeners have really appreciated listening to your insights. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Sean.
And we're keen to hear your next book.
Yeah. We'll get you on as soon as it's published.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Amazing.
I'll take you up.
Alrighty.
Nice.